Welcome back to Does the Shoe Fit? Today we are talking about Candy Montgomery and the trial, her crime, all that stuff. We have Sarah here today with us to talk about Candy, and we both watched the Hulu, I guess, reenactment.
Yeah, it's like a docuseries.
A docuseries. It's
reenactment, really.
Yeah. With Jessica Biel. I think that's how you pronounce her name.
I think so.
Who plays Candy. So, Sarah picked this topic, so I'll let her explain a little bit about, why you picked it, a little bit about the case, and then we'll kind of go into the mental health implications.
Yeah, so I picked it mainly because, and we'll, get into it later, but, so didn't know about the case really before I watched the show, but she, after the trial and everything, she went on to become a mental health counselor, which is pretty wild. Yeah. And that really caught me off guard, and I was like, wow, this you could really tie into mental health field and things like that. And also I love true crime, so it was a pretty short show. It was 4 to 5 episodes.
5 episodes, yeah.
And so yeah, easy to binge and was pretty good. I did like that it wasn't an interview type thing, and it was more like a reenactment.
Yeah.
So that got me hooked a little bit more.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about, for those who don't know, what happened? Well, briefly, so spoiler alert, if you'd rather watch the episodes before we talk about it, do that. But for those who don't really care, we'll give a little recap so you kind of know what's happening.
Yeah. So so it took place in the 80s. I want to say 1980. So Candy Montgomery had, and this took place in Texas,
yes.
Had an affair with basically her friend's husband. And so they had an affair, and then the affair ended. They made sure to tell each other. They set strict ground rules and stuff. They were both married, set rules to meet during lunch at a motel. She would make him lunch every time they met. I can't remember how often, maybe every other week or something. And then they would do it at the hotel. But
they would do it at that time.
Yeah, I had to think of where I was going with that. So the affair ended, and she one of the rules was once one of us starts to get feelings, this has to end. Mm-hmm. So it ended, and then the guy she was having an affair with, Alan, he I think then decided well, I need to focus on my marriage and things like that. So then also Alan and Candy's kids were their daughters were friends. They became really close, and essentially I'll skip, I don't need to tell you every detail, but the Candy ended up murdering Alan's wife, Betty, with an axe 41 times. Mm-hmm. And I actually found out some new information last night that just came back to me too, that this happened on Friday the 13th.
Yes, after The Shining was coming out.
The Shining,
out?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And apparently there was a newspaper article
yes.
in the house, on the table or whatever, when it was happening, about The Shining movie and
yep.
how it happened with an axe. So essentially Candy
axe murdered, I guess.
Yes, stabbed her or hit her with the axe 41 times. And then pleaded that it was self-defense. And so she was found not guilty. And pretty much her husband didn't leave her until a couple years later. They divorced. I'm not sure for what the exact reason was.
4 years later they divorced.
Yeah, and then she moved to, I think, Georgia.
Yep.
I believe she's still alive. I think I think she's in her 70s, 72 or something. Yep. And now she's a mental health counselor, working with people with depression. But then I saw last night too, she's never had any other run-ins with the law. Yep. No other history. So I guess what they were saying maybe was accurate. But the other detail too that I forgot to say was a psychiatrist did an evaluation on her and said that she was having a dissociative reaction to a trauma response to when she was younger. Her mom, just flashback, her mom had, because when the murder was happening, or right before it happened, Betty, which was the person that was murdered, shushed her, and she had a flashback to when her mom shushed her when she was a child, and that, like, sent her into a rage. But yeah, 41 times.
Which I almost feel like the 41 times does, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Go with the fact that she had a dissociative state, because in the Hulu show, they showed the husband, so Candy's husband, try to hit someone 41 times, like hit the wood,
yeah,
like with an axe 41 times, and he's counting, and you can see that he's getting, like, exhausted, and it's tiring
after just a
couple, and that makes him, like, at first he was nervous, and then when he realizes that, he's like, oh, there's no way she could have done that, crawls back into bed with her and, like, cuddles her, because I think what he felt like, she couldn't do that 41 times. I can barely do that. So the fact that that did happen does, I feel like, coincide with, if it was like a traumatic event kind of dissociation, you're not thinking like that. You're not, doing anything.
It's just adrenaline rush.
It's adrenaline.
Yeah.
And also the fact that she left the baby.
Yeah.
Because they had a baby, Betty and Alan did, at the time, and that's who Betty was, like, shushing. The baby cried or whatever.
Yeah.
And the baby went basically 13 hours alone, and, like, her voice went hoarse because she was just crying the entire time.
And she was, like, covered in feces. And
feces.
Oh,
and
that's so horrible.
And I think that another thing, like, Candy's a mom too, and I think in her state, I don't know if she would have just walked away like that maybe, but
yeah.
I think it just goes to add to the fact that she probably was dissociating.
Yeah. And I did find it weird too that, like, in the trial they didn't we didn't find anything about Candy's history or, like, her childhood, like, mental health, anything until the trial, when she was, like, telling the story, and I kind of felt like it was like, is this 100% accurate?
So that's what it felt like to me too when I was watching it, but at the same time I think it tried to, like, because the trial, it never came out until the trial for the people either. So I feel like it was kind of trying to be realistic in that sense. Because the show, I Googled, like, the real stuff versus the show, and the show's pretty accurate for the most part. Yes, it does say, like, things have been dramatized or changed for more viewer entertainment, I guess. But, like, it was pretty accurate.
Yeah, and then I think, like, the one scene, they were leaving the courthouse after she was, like, found not guilty, and, like, her and her husband just got in the car, and they were like, okay, like, what's for dinner type thing, like,
yeah.
And, and then it came out that she had another affair.
With her best friend's husband.
Yeah, I don't remember who it, yeah.
Sherry's husband. It hinted to that. So the Hulu, I tried to Google this too. I don't know if that was just something the show hinted at or if it was a real thing or both. Like, the show hinted at it being her best friend's husband.
That woman where she was like,
why didn't you tell me? You tell me everything.
Yeah. And then it, like, so then another thing was, like, one of the, like, preachers or people at her church, the woman who, like, divorced her husband, and, like, back then it was probably, like, a little more, like, taboo to divorce. It was when she noticed that Candy was reading those smut books, and then she noticed that her friend that divorced her husband was dating again, and then she was, like, kind of, like, jealous, like,
right,
maybe being bored with her husband and like wanted to have an affair.
Yeah, it was very interesting too, like, I don't, like, that part, I don't know how accurate it is, like, versus what Hulu put in there, if that actually happened. But something that did actually happen, apparently, and it came out, like, in the trial, too, just the way that the affair happened was, I was like, is this real? Like...
At the volleyball game?
Yes. Like, she just walks into his car...
Oh, yeah.
After the volleyball thing, and is like, I find you attractive, and I'd like to have an affair. Like, how...
It's just weird.
It felt
Who
like
does
a
that?
contract, like a business deal.
Well, yeah, they, like, she like had like the, what is it, like the pros and cons list, or
Yes.
like the rules list up in her house.
Uh-huh.
And then I was like thinking, like, who's paying for the hotel room, and do their spouses not notice the money missing? But then I saw online last night that like her husband, what Candy's husband
Was
did for
rich.
work, like it was only like $70,000 back then, but it
that's a lot.
equates to like 300,000.
Yes, he was an engineer.
Yeah,
I saw
or
that
something.
too.
Yeah.
Mhm. Apparently
So
they
like
were wealthy.
he probably didn't notice, or like,
No.
I don't know. But and then it kind of like felt bad for her husband, obviously, how like it comes out in the trial that she had the other affair, and her lawyer was pretty much like, her husband was upset about it, like, what the heck, you had another affair? And then her lawyer's like, well, hey, think about it this way, like, it's showing that, like, you know, like, this wasn't her only affair.
She wasn't in love with Alan and wanted
Yeah.
him for herself.
Right. And it wasn't like like, I killed his wife because I wanted Alan.
Right. It does, in a way, help her
But
case.
like, her poor husband, he was just told, like, hey,
Yeah.
like, you just gotta go with it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, you know, it's rare for someone to go into a murder frenzy in a, in a dissociative state, but like, it, for what her trauma was, I feel like it is a leap. Like,
Yeah.
her trauma of just being shushed as a child from her mom, and maybe they just didn't get into exactly the details of it, and maybe she did repress those memories. But, you know, it's one thing for like a war veteran to go into like a war state again, like when they're triggered, but it's another thing for like her to murder someone. Though she did, if her account is real, right? So we don't get Betty's account, and that's something that the Hulu show hinted at, because during the trial in the show, Candy sees Betty, like, or we see Betty. And
She grabbed the axe.
what? In the trial.
Oh. Yeah.
So
Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
you'll hear
sorry.
yeah. So in the trial at the courthouse, they show Betty being there.
Right.
And something Betty says is, well, that's your story. Your side of the story, I think, is actually what she says. And I think, to me, that's hinting like we only ever get her side of the story.
Right.
So she claimed self-defense. She claimed that Betty was the one who grabbed the axe first and threatened Candy to stay away from her husband, and went like psycho first. Then, you know, in the struggle, she got shushed, and that triggered the reaction of grabbing the axe and then killing Betty.
And so I also saw too, was the shushing that like she had the flashback to was a shush when she was a child, and like her mom or she got hit with a sharp object.
Yep, her head. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so like with the struggle with Betty, the axe, I guess, hit her on the foot, and then I guess like
I think it hit her in the head. Well, I guess if that's real.
yeah, so like it hit her in the foot at first.
Gotcha.
And then she like, I guess like did something, and then they heard the baby cry, and then Betty shushed her, and that was what triggered the
So it was,
flashback.
like,
So it was
all
like
of the things
yeah.
together.
So apparently, because I don't think it said this in the show, but I saw it online. Was like it was almost exact. Like the childhood experience was like she got hit with something sharp, and then like
was shushed.
you was shushed, and that's what like
That makes
because
sense.
it also showed a picture of her foot, because do you remember the bruise that she had on her foot when they took
Yeah.
her, like when they asked her questions at the station? She was like, oh, like I don't know, I hit it or something.
Yeah, she claimed that
It's huge.
something like a drain or something that she kept.
Yeah, like kicking or like
Kicking.
accidentally hit. And then on the internet, like the picture that I saw where like the axe had supposedly hit her toe, you could there was like nothing there, and I was like,
Oh, interesting.
yeah. So that's what apparently was like what happened when she was shushed, or the sharp object or whatever that hit her. But I don't really remember. I guess just in the struggle and stuff, the head.
Yeah.
But it also showed pictures of like the people that played the characters, and then the actual people. They looked so much alike.
The same.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Especially
they did a really
like
good job.
Jessica Biel. Yeah. But
I think on that note too, with the foot, like, wouldn't, and I guess because the time that she got caught or like the trial happened, it was longer. I don't remember how many weeks it was since Betty's death when that happened, but
I think it said October.
If it was self-defense, wouldn't Candy have like defensive wounds too? Like bruises, like, I mean, the Hulu show, obviously we don't know exactly what happened, but it showed them getting thrown around, like getting hit with an axe herself in the head and I guess on the foot. Wouldn't those things still be there? Like scars and stuff, if it was.
I mean, they never really showed anything more from her head, but also her hair covered it.
Kind of covered it, yeah.
And then, like, I don't know. It just, like, it also seemed sketchy to me, too, when, like, she showed up at her lawyer's office and then, like, because this was, like, kind of soon, and then he walks back in and he's like, we have a self-defense case or something. And, like, I was like, it seemed like she kind of just, like, thought that up and, like,
yeah,
it was kind of far-fetched.
Well,
but
I think because I like the way they did it, where you didn't see what happens until the last episode. So when you're getting all this information from, we're like blind to it. We're just like, oh, we know that she got covered in, like, you know, she killed someone right away.
Yeah.
You know who she killed right away, but you didn't see how it happened. But then you're hearing the account, like, almost as if you're a juror in a way, because you're seeing everything up until the crime and then hearing about the crime at the end, and it's almost like, okay, so you make your judgments. Because when I was first watching it, I was like, wow, that self-defense seemed out of nowhere, like where'd that even come from? How would Betty even have an axe and all these things? But then when they put it together in the trial, I was like, oh wait, that kind of makes sense. And so I feel like it helped me understand how she was acquitted, because it kind of did make sense.
Yeah. In the beginning, though, when I was watching, I guess maybe because before I watched it, I knew what happened. But, like in the beginning when I was watching and she called Betty to ask for another sleepover, it just kind of seemed like she was, like, planning in a way.
Well, I did know what happened, too.
Yeah,
so I thought that, too. But then that's, like, what a terrible plan.
I know.
And
then
how
she, like, was, like, pushing her alibi on people. Like, oh, my watch stopped working and, like, all of that. And it's like, nobody asked.
Right. But I also feel like she was panicking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so also saw that, like, the jury was 9 women and 3 men.
Interesting.
And so I feel like that kind of, like, and also, too, like, I think back then the, like, mental health was still so taboo, and like people weren't really, like, super educated on, like, you know, PTSD or dissociative reactions and things like that. So, like, they were maybe just going with it, and, like, also maybe the majority of the jury being women, they, like, probably sided with her and felt for her.
But you have to have a unanimous.
Yeah.
Like, all of the men had to have agreed to.
At least most of them, yeah. So
I think you have to have a unanimous. Every single juror has to say,
yeah, you're right,
not guilty. Otherwise, it's a hung jury.
Yeah.
Because they all have to agree on it. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, the trial was very interesting to me. Honestly, like, out of the whole show, I think the last episode was the most interesting for me specifically. I feel like it was really cool to see, like, how the trial happened. Like, also, the judge was super biased against her. And even with that judge bias, the jury still made their decision. But, like, I looked that up because I was like, I wonder if that's true. Like, I wonder if her lawyer got jail time, and he did. He got 4 days of jail time for whatever.
Oh, yeah, they did add. I was trying to remember.
Yes.
He did keep getting, yeah.
Because he was, like, trying to stand up for her, being like, you're clearly being biased here. And I wonder if that was something that helped the case, because he called it out.
Yeah.
And the jury hears that.
Yeah.
They hear him.
And then they take it into consideration. Also, like, I just also think, too, like, no consequences whatsoever. I mean, besides the guilt and having to live with that. But also, like, if that happened today and somebody, like, did walk free with self-defense, like, they would still get some sort of...
You would get something.
Like, maybe, like, you know, hospitalization or some sort of like mental health like requirement court ordered.
Yes.
And like there was nothing.
Right.
And then she was able to just become like a counselor.
And I think that goes to show, like, one, our criminal system has changed, but also the mental health side of things, because that's not something they even considered. Like, let's not give her help for her mental health, or like work through her PTSD or work through all these things. Like, that just wasn't a thing back then. And so it's great that there hasn't been any other instances, but like, they didn't really help her to get there.
Yeah. True.
But I almost feel like at this point it would have been manslaughter. And I don't know if, like, there was that differentiation between, like, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and manslaughter. I feel like today, if that had happened, it would have been manslaughter. And she would have had something.
Yeah.
Because maybe it wasn't first degree, it wasn't planned. Like, probably not.
Even self-defense. Like,
second degree, like, if you claimed this, you claim psychosis in a way, you could probably get manslaughter. But that's, I guess, not a thing back then. I didn't look too much into the trial stuff, but I did see that there's a podcast about it. There's this, can't remember the name, so sorry, but if you look it up, there's these two attorneys that talk about the case on their podcast, and they talk about the, like, lawyer law aspect of it in much greater detail for the rest of us who don't necessarily understand that. So check that out if you're interested in it. And there's a bunch of podcasts actually on this as well. The one I do remember is like Female Criminal or something. Apparently has an episode or two on her, and apparently it's a really good one.
Yeah, that would be interesting to hear, like, different, like, bits and pieces that were left out, because, like, because I was looking up, like, pleading insanity and, like, when that first came around.
Insanity, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, and...
did she plead insanity?
They didn't, like, directly say it.
Was that a thing?
It was. Like, that became a thing in, like, 18...
Oh, okay.
I can't remember. But, like, way before.
Right. It's almost like she did without doing it.
Right, but, like, I feel like even if you do plead insanity...
You have to plead guilty, right?
Well, yeah, kind of, I guess. But then, like, you're still mandated to, like, get the help.
Yeah.
And so, like, but also...
Because I don't think you can say not guilty with insanity. I think you plead guilty with insanity.
Guilty by insanity or something like that.
Yeah, but she pleaded not guilty.
And straight up not guilty.
And therefore got off scot-free.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And apparently her daughter, it said she went on to work with her daughter.
Yeah.
So.
I think her daughter's also a mental health counselor, maybe?
I think so, yeah. It's crazy, too. Like, she's in her 70s and still working. Like, why aren't you retired yet? But maybe.
Is she still working?
That's what it
Do you know?
That's what it said.
Like it.
But I wasn't sure how old the article I was looking at was. I think it was maybe like a year or two old. But it said she was still practicing. So I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, then maybe she is. Like, a little bit at least.
Yeah. So,
it also, like, I guess we can talk a little bit about, like, her relationship and conflict with, like, Betty and Alan in that sense. Like,
yeah.
The show made it seem like she was not, like, friends with her necessarily until she started
the affair. Yeah, and it seemed like she, like, befriended her. Sorry. It seemed like she befriended her, like, to kind of, like, cover up and, like, suck up to her.
Yeah,
and so she wouldn't suspect.
That guilt.
Yeah, guilt. And so, like, Betty maybe wouldn't suspect. Like, she threw Betty a baby shower at her house.
Right.
And
I don't know if
like,
that's real. Maybe it is.
I don't know that either. That could have been made up. But,
at least in the show's standpoint, she did throw a baby shower for her.
Because, like, when you, like, kind of look it up, it looks like she, or from what it says online, it looks like they had the affair before they were already friends. And they were friends before the affair happened. But really, the affair came first. And then Candy kind of, like, I think she started feeling guilty or, like, just wanted to cover her tracks.
Yeah, that's at least what the Hulu show kind of made it out to
Yeah.
be. They also, it's interesting, the Hulu show, this reminded me, I like to look at how shows portray things, and there's another show on HBO out about this exact same case, and Elizabeth Olsen plays Candy. It's called Love and Death. And apparently that's like coming out now, like new episodes come out or whatever. So it'd be interesting to watch that and then compare it to how Hulu did it.
Yeah.
But the way Hulu did it made it almost like make you question her, because in the beginning it opens up and it's like, okay, she crazy, and then throughout the time you're like, oh, maybe she did have PTSD and a dissociative state, and now I kind of like that. That sucks. Like, that'd be hard. And then the very end made you think again, maybe she was crazy. Like, it was very, because she says, like, I don't know if she's quoting the Bible or a story or something. I don't know too much about that, but she quotes the same thing that she quotes in the beginning at the end in
Tell
the
me again
show.
what the quote was.
Something about, like, when things don't turn out the way you want them to, just wait and it may work out. Something like that, where it was like talking about a tree and getting cut down.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that part.
Yeah, like it's, I believe it was like supposed to be a children's play, and it's all about the church because they all knew each other through their church.
Yes.
So it weighed heavily on that. So I'm assuming it was something about like God and his plan or like whatever, and
Right.
like he, or, you know, and then she says that in the beginning and says it at the end. And so I feel like because we don't really know, like I said, we'll never get Betty's side of the story. It's still a mystery. But with context clues and stuff, I feel like it does seem like she did have a PTSD
Especially
episode.
since she, like, nothing else happened
Right.
the rest of her life. And also the, I looked up the difference between the two shows because I was trying to decide which one I wanted to watch after I heard about the case. And
The HBO one or a different one?
the HBO one and the Hulu one,
Okay.
even though I wouldn't have been able to finish the Hulu one or the HBO one since new episodes are still coming out. But it looked like, so from what it said online, was the HBO one, Love and Death, portrays it to be more of a more as a crime of passion.
Oh.
Whereas I think Hulu like portrays it as like crime.
The
and-
dissociative
Yeah.
aspect.
Yeah.
Which is more true to what the trial ended up
yeah
coming out as.
And now I kind of want to watch the HBO one because I'm curious if it's as like good, is it a reenactment, is it like more docu-series, like
Right.
kind of thing.
I think it's a reenactment. I think
Yeah.
it's the same thing, but like I said,
a little twisted.
different twists. It just depends on what, I guess, not agenda necessarily, but maybe what side they want you to be thinking about or
Yeah.
like posing. But also like the fact that she's still alive, and you know we have to be respectful of her, and that, which is hard because like, but so is Betty's family is still, I don't know about her parents, but like her kids
Right.
are still alive, and it's like they lost their mom.
And also this was something that like
So sorry, go ahead.
this was something that like I didn't think of until kind of just now, was like Betty's mental health
Yeah.
was like, she from the very beginning she had some like anxiety, probably some depression, maybe some postpartum depression for sure. Kind of seemed like she wasn't really like connecting with the baby,
Right.
the new baby.
Yeah. And yes, on that note, because I wanted to talk about that, do we know if that's real? Because I couldn't look that up and be like, I didn't look that up necessarily, but that was something where it was like, is this Alan's portrayal of how she was acting? And that's, it's going to be skewed because obviously he went to go have an affair, and maybe you could say like, sure, there's a reason. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Like,
Yeah.
most of the time you can say that there is, but that would be his portrayal of, you know, she was distant, she was sad, and like maybe that was true, but how true was it?
Right.
To the extent, for, because there's always two sides of the story. Like, she could have just been a new mom, not new mom, but like,
Right.
she just had a baby. Like, that's hard.
Well, and then it came out too that, and we don't know if this is true, that Betty had an affair.
Yes.
Alan did say
one
that Betty,
time.
yeah, one time, but who knows if that's true?
I don't know if that's true either.
And
Or if
maybe
that was just
Love
made
and
up for
Death,
the-
yeah, to like so he didn't have to admit to his affair.
Right.
But maybe Love and Death shows more or different
Aspects.
about Betty's. But it's like almost like he was like really worried that she was going to do something or something happened to her when he kept calling, and was like really like worried about her. Like he was like afraid,
like her depression, or
Yeah.
she killed herself or something.
Yeah.
Because, and this is what I was going to bring up, she was pregnant.
Was it a third?
Yes.
I forgot about that.
When she died, she was pregnant.
Because I was like getting confused in what they were showing the trial, and I was like, wait, like I couldn't remember if she was pregnant for the third time.
Yep.
Or yeah.
And that's another thing why I think goes into how Candy, I don't know if Candy would kill a pregnant woman. Like,
or do you think she killed her because she knew she was pregnant and didn't want Alan to have
I don't know.
I don't
If it's true that she had a second affair, I feel like that's a pretty, like, she probably wasn't in love with Alan.
Yeah.
Or
I
obsessed
want
with
to know
him.
more about that. Like, do you think she really had another affair?
I think so.
Yeah.
When I looked it up, it seemed like it was real, and that it did hint to Sherry's husband being that person, but she never said it in the trial to protect his identity.
Yeah, she did say that. I wonder if Sherry ever knew.
In the Hulu series, it made it seem like she did catch on.
Okay.
And that's why they weren't there for her. What's the word? Sentencing, or like the guilty
final,
the
verdict.
Verdict.
Yeah.
Thank you. Verdict.
Yeah.
Because in the Hulu series, she's like, "Where's Sherry?" And like, it's because they kind of. And then when they're going to the car, the lawyer's like, probably, or someone says probably keeping her husband away from you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I did not put that together.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
But I can't tell if that was real.
Yeah.
Because I looked it up, but then I couldn't tell if I was like looking up something that was just giving me what Hulu did, or if I was looking up a real. It's so hard to tell like the
Right.
differences.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, this is like verbatim what like the Hulu show
Yeah.
showed. So whether Hulu was like extremely correct or that was just about the Hulu show.
Right. Yeah.
Someone
I was trying to
fact-check
look.
me.
Yeah, I was trying to look for different like articles and stuff on the case, and like it was kind of hard to find like
Because all
credible
these shows are
sources.
coming out. Yeah. Because I couldn't tell, like, wait, is this the HBO? Is this, like, a TV show version?
Yeah.
And was there a movie that came out in the 90s or something?
I think so.
Or
there was another, but it like had an interesting name where I was like, is this
I thought it was, like, Love
About
and
it?
Death Again.
something
Or
similar
maybe
to
not.
that?
It was something
Yeah.
similar.
I don't remember where it's on or like what exactly. But yeah, I was really surprised I hadn't heard about this sooner,
Yeah.
because I'm totally into that stuff.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of, like, true crime podcasts. I've never heard about this case.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's maybe because they're still alive, and that's tough to talk about sometimes. You don't want to get, like, say the wrong thing or whatever, but
Yeah.
she was acquitted, and, like, by all rights, by the jury, she's not guilty. But I do think this, like, you know, I'm glad that with time we have talked more about, like, mental health, and it's in the, like you said, verdicts now of, like, you need to attend these, like, rehab, or, like, go to a PTSD
Counseling.
specialist, use EMDR, like, do these things to help with that trigger response so that doesn't happen again, and work through some of that childhood trauma that she clearly has.
Right. Because I wonder, like, can't remember if they said in the show, like, was her mom still alive? I wonder if they would have had her mom
I don't know.
testify or anything.
Yeah, I
or
don't
kind
know.
of, like, speak on her behalf, or
Right.
kind of, like, fact check her
Right.
childhood.
But I mean, even in the trial, and again, because I don't know the trial necessarily, but like the prosecution downplayed mental health because they didn't want it to be, you know, the mental health reason, the dissociative PTSD. They were like hating on the psychiatrist in a way. They're like, you can't sit there and like a doctor can't talk to you for an hour and understand. That's
Right.
our whole job. Like, that's the
Right.
whole basis of her job, is figuring out what's happening within an hour of the first time meeting you.
Yeah.
Like,
They really didn't talk much about mental health. Like,
No.
they said, like, oh, it was a dissociative reaction, but, like, that's kind of it.
yeah, and it's interesting because you'd think that they'd Hulu would like harp more on like, hey, like but I guess they were trying to stick to the times.
How it really was.
How it really was, which is fair, so I get that. So it shows like at the time there was such a lack of knowledge or even understanding of mental health. Like I think even like in the trial it showed like the crowd's reaction. And people were convinced it was a crime of passion, regardless of what the verdict was, and how they essentially they had to move because she couldn't stay in that area.
Right. And like maybe the jury just didn't even want to like question it and like challenge it because it was so like,
yeah,
they were like, oh, the psychiatrist, the doctor knows what they're talking about, like it must be it.
Right. I feel like there's an interesting point, like the ethical implications of diagnosing psychological disorders in a legal setting. Like, is it rushed? Are you just doing it to serve your point? Or is it just coming up as like, no, this is real, you know? It's interesting. 'Cause it was something the defense brought up. So it's like so...
Yeah.
One side or the other.
I wonder if it's like, I guess you have to have an unbiased like doctor and psychiatrist doing the evaluation, so that way they're not like swayed to like really look for like PTSD or like prove whether they're guilty or not guilty.
Yeah, and I don't know what happened in this case because it doesn't really say. Was it like a friend of his that he signed her up with? I know that like the lawyer put her with a psychiatrist, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it was like...
I don't know if
collusion or they didn't really talk about it. But the other thing too that I just thought of, oh goodness, has it left my brain? Maybe. Psychiatrists.
The lawyer.
Oh, yeah. So because I listen to many crime podcasts, there have been so many cases where the psychiatrist is wrong.
Oh.
Like, where one psychiatrist will say this, another psychiatrist will say that, and it's really, like, up to the prosecution or the defense to kind of use whichever one fits their narrative more. Or different psychiatrists will say something about the same person, and it just changes through time, like, whether that's, like, serial killer stuff I've listened to, or just, like, other things in general. Like, sometimes they're not correct.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of like when you go to the, like a medical doctor and you can see 3 and they all give you like a different diagnosis, kind of like in our field, like we may like diagnose somebody with depression, whereas another person might see it as, you know, something else or whatever it may be. But like also like when they like stick to the prosecution and like it's left to the jury to decide, it's like, but they're not professionals.
They're not professionals,
they don't know the diagnoses or like the criteria, things like that. So that's kind of scary. Yeah. And speaking on that too, with all the crime podcasts I've heard, there have been trials where the verdict has been the wrong verdict, like where the jury thinks not guilty and they were very guilty. And it comes out later, or like, you know, and it's just like, think about the trial of your peers. Like, I actually was summoned to jury duty a couple years ago, and just sitting in that room and looking around, like, I've always thought, like, oh, jury of my peers, I'm thinking about me, like 8 of me sitting there, like, very much aware of, like, mental health and, like, all these things. But I'm looking around this room that I'm with potential other jurors, and I'm just like, wow, they're really peers. Like, these could be anybody. And what if it was, like, a high-profile case?
Yeah, and you expect them to... These just normal people living out their lives, not really knowing much about things like that, to judge such a huge thing. It's very interesting. I do still agree with, you know, there should be a jury. It's just interesting how, like, when I think jury, I'm thinking about me. I'm not thinking about, like, the people I'm walking down the street with.
Right. Well, and so my stepmom was just summoned for jury duty, and she actually it was like a week-long case. And so like she was telling me how like the judge will like ask, like, do you have any like prior commitments or anything that may hold you back from the case? And like people had like family vacations, and like they would just kind of like get excused from jury duty because of that, so that way they weren't like rushing it or like you know, like not giving 100%.
Right.
Because they just wanted this to end so that they could go on their vacation or whatever it may be.
Right.
Or like, if you stay on this jury, will it cause you financial hardship to miss work? Things like
Right.
that. So
they did do that for us too.
yeah, it's kind of crazy. I've been summoned a couple times, but never actually had to go.
Oh, yeah. See, I was like, when I summoned, I was in like group B, essentially. I didn't know that at the time, but they were going through group A first to pick people, but we were like the backup group if they couldn't find everyone from group A. For some reason, it took them 2 days to pick their jury, and I had to be there for both days, and I never got interviewed, like, by the time they picked whoever they picked, and, like, I don't think any of jury B got picked. Which was a literal waste of our time.
Yeah.
And I had to miss work for it, so it was kind of annoying, but I really wanted to be picked.
Yeah, I feel like it would be a cool experience.
It would be. It was a murder case, too, actually. I know.
Oh my gosh.
In Charlotte.
That'd be awesome.
It would have been.
I mean, not awesome, but like,
Couldn't,
you know,
I wouldn't have been able to talk about it, but like,
yeah.
It was definitely more on the exciting of jury duties possibility, I guess, but might have to wait my turn for a couple more years now.
Yeah. It'll come up again. Maybe not a murder case, but hopefully not.
I feel like they'd be more interesting, hence the crime podcast lover.
Right.
But let's see. Then I think, you know, with mental health, let's talk about the prevention. Like, wonder if she would have gotten the help that she needed before all of this, would it have even happened? Like, if therapy wasn't as taboo, she went, because she knew she had childhood trauma, got help with it, worked through PTSD stuff, like, maybe that trigger would have never happened.
I'm wondering if she even, like, recognized that as trauma until
the trial.
Yeah, until after until the murder happened and the trial and stuff. Like, in my mind, like, I feel like she just, like, got triggered, and then afterwards was maybe like,
oh, I have some stuff.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if she even, like, knew that she needed help.
That is true. I see that point.
Yeah.
It does make sense that, but I also feel like because it was never talked about, she would have never known that, oh, like, my childhood maybe might be an issue. Because
she did seem a little iffy, like, in the beginning. Like, she just seemed, like, not iffy, but, like, just kind of, like, off in the beginning. Like, how, like, she just, the way she would, like, look at her husband, or, like, seemed, like, bored with her marriage, where, like, she was, like, so, like, eager to go have an affair, like, just with anybody.
Yeah.
And so, like, things did seem a little off with her, where maybe it was, like, but I wasn't really thinking of it as, like, mental health. It just kind of was, like, okay, like, are you unhappy in your marriage? But,
maybe it was a bit of both.
Yeah. So, and I think it was a little self-sabotage, too.
Yes, probably.
Yeah.
One of the, and I don't know if this is real, obviously, but in the Hulu show, she's calling her, like, friend, like, tell me why I shouldn't have an affair or whatever.
Yeah.
And the friend, the preacher, was like, because you have, like, the perfect life, right? You have, like, a husband, children, like, you're financially stable, things like that. And it made me laugh. She was like, all he does is mouth breathe on the couch. And I thought that was so relatable. Because you're just like, oh yeah, so does my husband. Like, but it's just like,
everything was going so great, so she was bored, and she was like,
it just sounds like
I need something like, kind of like when things are going good, like, you want to do something to, like, kind of ruin it.
And, you know, it's like, I run into this a lot with, like, couples counseling too. It's like that spark dies. It does. It's meant to. Like, you get comfortable. It's not like it used to be. You may not date like you used to. Like, you have kids and it real dies. Like, but that's part of it. You picked this partner to, like, go through the ups, the downs. Like, people forget that when they have the downs, that you chose to do
and
these
then they
downs.
seek elsewhere.
Yes, because it's that passion, that lust, that spark, that fire, but it burns. If it burns quickly, it burns out quickly too. Like, and I'm wondering with her affair, apparently, speaking of that, the subpar affair is a true thing. Like, it was a subpar affair.
I saw that, but then in the Hulu show, she said, like, it was great or something.
I was confused because in the same scene, it went from being very obviously subpar to then it seeming like, oh, there was passion.
Right.
Like, they showed the, like, literally 1-1. Like, I was confused by that. And so, therefore, I was like, did she really have feelings with him? Was she just intimate? Like, intimacy in terms of emotional connection, emotional intimacy, and that's what she was falling for? Because she, again, emotionally wise, like, when you're with somebody for X amount of years, you know everything. Like, you can't really dig deep or, like, learn more or, like, you know, it's not as exciting because it's like, oh, yeah, I know that. You've already told me that. Or, like, I know you from the inside out. And at that point, it's like, all right, well, there's nothing more to explore. So you almost seek, like, emotional intimacy for, like, new things to talk about. And,
Right.
Yeah. So there's that aspect, too.
Yeah, and it was like, why Alan?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, it was like, it didn't seem like she was attracted to his personality. Like, I mean, she saw him playing volleyball, sweating, and, like, she was like, that's him. That's who.
But I don't, I mean, is that true? Maybe. I think it was. I think after a volleyball game, apparently she did go in his car.
Yeah.
And,
But
like,
it seemed like she was, like, ready for it. She put on the lipstick and everything.
she knew what she was going to do.
Yeah, but I don't know if she knew exactly it was him.
Right. I think she was
She
just
was gonna
looking
scope it
for
out. Yeah.
who could I.
Yeah.
Very bold of her. What if he was
know.
like, I'm absolutely in love with my wife. Like, get out of my car. Like, I'm going to tell everybody. Like,
yeah, what are you doing? Because,
Very
like, could you
bold.
imagine, like, today, like,
Oh
going
my
up to
God.
someone and being like, I want to have an affair?
No.
You'd be like,
what?
What? Who are you?
That's what I was feeling like when I was watching that scene. I was like, what?
And especially, like, someone from church.
I know, exactly. That's even crazier to me. I'm like,
Yeah.
you guys go to the same church. Like, how do you, are all these church people trying to have affairs? Like, is that something that,
And
like,
how do you
what?
know they, like, I mean, it's a, you know, frowned upon in church,
Yeah.
adultery. So, like, how do you know that person wasn't going to be like, heck no, like,
Right.
no.
It was, yeah, that's very interesting too. Crazy.
Yeah.
It's very bold of her to do
Very
those
bold.
things. But I think you do have a good point, kind of going back to, like, the prevention. Like, if she didn't even know it was a problem, then maybe she wouldn't have gotten help otherwise.
Yeah. Maybe something worse could have happened. I don't know what would have been worse, but
Yeah.
she could have multiple people.
I definitely feel like this case really proves the importance of mental health. And, like, oh, one last thing I was going to say. The fact that she became a mental health counselor, to me, almost also shows that she probably did have a PTSD event, because a lot of us go into the mental health field because we've struggled with something ourselves or have experienced things ourselves, and that's what makes us so interested in this field.
Yeah.
So it would make sense that if she experienced something like that, she'd want to give back, help others. Like, now she's interested in the field, so I see that too.
Yeah. And especially because she didn't do any other crimes after that.
Right.
So,
Yep.
good intentions, maybe.
Yeah, like, hopefully she's helping people. I wonder if she's a good therapist. Maybe she is.
I know. I did actually try to look her up on psychology today. She's not there.
Oh, that's really funny. I didn't
Yeah.
actually... I know what her... Did you look up her maiden name? That's what she goes by right now.
Can't remember. Maybe, maybe not.
She
Can't
goes
remember.
by-
I could try again.
Yeah, I want to try again after this. and
Candace
see if-
Wheeler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see if that comes up. But, well, so we're going to wrap up, and at the end, you know, we talk about, does the shoe fit? So in this sense, do we think the Hulu show fits the real life story? I almost think yes.
I think so.
To, like, from what I've Googled, from what I've tried to fact check, it's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Hulu show is a little bit more dramatic for viewers. I mean, you have to do that. I get
Yeah.
it. But in terms of the big things, I think they pretty much lined it up accurately.
Yeah.
One thing I would love to know more about was Betty's mental health, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I really would like to fact check that. Like,
Yeah.
was she actually struggling?
Yeah, that was
I don't
something I
know.
didn't really look up. I just kept looking up Candy. Whereas,
Right.
like,
Why
a
would
Google search for Betty Gore would, like,
Yeah.
probably tell you a lot. But,
Yeah.
like, what was her childhood like, and, like, her
Right.
history and stuff. So,
And I wonder if the wow, keep going. But I wonder if the adoption foster boy was real.
yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a little rough to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
poor
that's
guy.
it's sad. But I don't know if that's true or not. Was that made up, or like did they actually try to foster
didn't
kids?
talk about that online.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a good point.
Maybe they did though. Like I could see that family, and it shows like they're kind and like she wanted to help, and but it also is tough to do that. It's a very tough thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so well, thank you for listening and watching. Overall, I think it was a good show, so I definitely recommend watching it yourself if you were wanting to, and then maybe even watching Love and Death on Hulu and kind of cross comparing and seeing how that works. But thank you, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.